Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's topic was inspired by a post that I saw commenter Georges L. Hage post on one of my videos. Paraphrasing a bit, it was something like, what's the purpose of having penalties at all if it's just going to be a warning? And that's a fair question. If the only thing a judge can do is warn a player not to do something again, what's to actually stop that player from doing it again? In most cases, the answer is a single word: upgrades. Now, unlike my graphics card, I hope to never upgrade any of the penalties that I give. However, it is still a really interesting topic and something that bears some discussion, so let's get started. First of all, let's say that you're playing a game and you accidentally drop a couple cards from your opponent's library onto the table while you're shuffling. If you watched my video last week, you know that this is an example of looking at extra cards, and the penalty for this is normally a warning. When I say normally, the reason for that is because if you commit this infraction again, the penalty is still going to be a warning. But if you commit it a third time, then the penalty isn't going to be a warning anymore. Rather, it'll get upgraded to a game loss. One thing to note is that the upgrade only looks at how many times you've committed an error in a specific category. It doesn't have to be committed the same way. So, for example, if you reach over and accidentally knock a card off the top of your library while you're trying to pick up your graveyard, that would also be an example of looking at extra cards. The fact that you committed that infraction in a different way is immaterial. It still counts as a looking at extra cards for the purposes of upgrades. Now, if you accidentally knocked over 3 cards instead of just 1, that does not count as 3 different instances of looking at extra cards. If the root cause is the same, all of the infractions are considered as one single instance of that infraction. So, knocking over 3 cards would be looking at extra cards, the same as knocking over just 1 would be. You might be wondering if all infractions get handled the same way, and the answer is no. Gameplay errors, such as what you see on screen now, give you 2 warnings before the third instance gets upgraded to a game loss. Meanwhile, tournament errors, where you break a tournament rule rather than a game rule, you only get 1 warning before the second and all subsequent issuances become a game loss. If you're familiar with the RPG, you might have noticed that I left one gameplay error off of there. That's because failure to maintain game state is never upgraded. The reason for this is it's possible to commit this infraction without even knowing it. Like, for example, if your opponent breaks a game rule that you didn't even know existed. That would still be a failure to maintain game state, but there's no way we would ever give someone a game loss for something like that. Another thing you might want to know is how these things work in multi-day tournaments. Obviously, if you have a tournament with 15 rounds spread over 2 days, well, that gives you a lot of instances where you could potentially be committing one of these errors. In concession to this, the counter resets at the end of every day. So if you commit 2 looking at extra cards on day 1 of a GP, and then on day 2 of a GP you commit a third looking at extra cards, then you would still be getting a warning for that third looking at extra cards, even though it's your third one in the tournament, because it's only your first one that day. To close things out, I wanted to talk about some of the practical considerations related to upgrades. For example, if you have a player and you tell them that they're going to be getting a warning for an infraction that they just committed, but then later on you change your mind and actually give them a game loss, well, I hope everybody can see what a really awful customer service experience that would be for that player. That's why it's very important to always ask people if they've ever gotten any penalties before you tell them what the penalty that they're going to be getting is. I don't like to ask if they've ever gotten something like a looking at extra cards or a game rule violation. It's not really reasonable to expect that a player would remember what the exact name of the infraction they got was 3 or 4 rounds later. However, people should remember if they talked to a judge or if they ever got an infraction. So those sorts of things are the things that I like to ask. And if you're a player, I really encourage you to tell the truth if a judge asks you a question like this. If the scorekeeper, the person whose job it is to enter these infractions in, is doing their job, then you're definitely going to get caught if you lie about it. And then you would have to have a really awkward conversation with the judge about why you said that you hadn't had any infractions when you actually did. Needless to say, that's not going to be a conversation that's going to end well. Finally, it's best practice to always tell the player if you know that their next infraction is going to get upgraded. It's really jarring to have the penalty go from a warning to a game loss, so if you warn the player ahead of time that this is a possibility, then that can help them accept it easier if this situation does happen to come up. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again tomorrow for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.